Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. All right, here is the bottom line up front. We are about to walk through a debate on the existence of God, but look, we are not talking about carbon dating or the Big Bang. We are talking about the three things that keep believers up at night and make skeptics walk away. The deafening silence of a God who supposedly wants to be known, the statistical, unfairness of where you happen to be born, and the problem of suffering that seems to serve absolutely no purpose. Today, we are unpacking an argument that claims atheism isn't just a rejection of faith. It is actually a better storyteller that fits the raw data of our lives far better than theism ever could.
It's a heavy lineup for sure, but it is an incredibly clarifying one.
Absolutely. So, to set the stage, we are looking at an opening statement from a debate held at Sattler College. On one side, you have Jonathan, a Christian apologist. On the other, you have Alex O'Connor. He's a philosophy and theology graduate, a massive YouTuber, and honestly, one of the sharpest young minds in the atheist space right now.
And what makes O'Connor so interesting here is his strategy. He isn't trying to prove that a God is, logically impossible, like a square circle or something. He's doing something called an inference to the best explanation.
Which, okay, that sounds like a mouthful of philosophy jargon. Can you translate that for us?
Yeah, it's basically just detective logic.
Yeah.
So imagine you walk into a room and you find a broken window and, a baseball on the floor. You could invent a story where a ghost broke the window and teleported the ball there. I mean, that is technically possible. But the best explanation, the one that fits the facts with the fewest assumptions, is that a kid hit a home run through your window.
So O'Connor is looking at the facts of our world, the silence, the geography, the pain, and he's asking, which story fits better? Is it the story where a loving God is supervising everything, but he's, hiding? Or is it the story where nature is just all there is?
Exactly. He argues that naturalism, the view that the physical world is all there is, just predicts the data better. It's the baseball through the window. Theism, he argues, has to invent the ghost.
And he starts this whole framework by kind of sidestepping science entirely. He actually tells the audience, I'm not asking you to look down a microscope. He wants them to look at their own direct experience. And he uses the Bible, of all things, to set this up. He quotes Psalm 139.
The inescapable God.
Right.
Yeah, it is one of the most famous passages in Scripture.
Right. Where can I go from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. Now, growing up, I always heard that as a comfort, You're never alone. God is always holding your hand.
For a believer, it's the ultimate security blanket. But O'Connor just flips this completely. He asks us to look at that verse through the eyes of someone who is desperately searching for God but can't find him. For that person, this verse isn't a promise.
It's a taunt.
It's a taunt. Think about the reality. If you are screaming into the void, begging for help, and you hear nothing, and then you read a text saying, I am everywhere, it feels a little like gaslighting. O'Connor argues that for millions of people, the inescapable God is actually the invisible God.
And this leads us right to the first massive pillar of his argument, divine hiddenness.
This is a concept that was formalized by the philosopher J.L. Schellenberg, and it revolves around a really specific type of person, the non-resistant non-believer.
Okay, we need to define that because I think a lot of religious people, they assume that if you're an atheist, you're just angry. The I hate God archetype. You're rebellious, you want to sin, so you suppress the truth.
And O'Connor is very fair here. He admits those people exist. He actually cites a poll where 85% of atheists said that even if God were proven to exist, they still wouldn't worship him. They don't want a cosmic boss. That is resistant non-belief.
Okay, so he's not talking about the rebels.
No, he's talking about the other group, the people who are open, the people who, they want to believe. They search, they pray, they read, they humble themselves, and they find nothing.
The logic seems pretty airtight when he lays it out. Premise 1. A perfectly loving God would not refuse a relationship to someone who is open and willing to have one. I mean, if you're a loving parent and your kid calls you, you pick up the phone. You don't hide in the closet for 40 years.
Exactly. Relationship requires two-way communication. If one side is silent, there is no relationship. Simple as that.
Then premise 2. Willing people exist who search and find absolutely nothing. Conclusion. Therefore, a perfectly loving God likely doesn't exist.
Now, the usual religious defense here is to attack premise 2, They'll say, well, maybe you weren't really looking. Maybe you didn't have enough faith. Maybe you have some secret pride.
And this is where O'Connor gets personal. He lays out his own resume, and honestly, it sounded exhausting. He didn't just, casually Google, is God real?
Not at all. He was an altar boy. He went to Catholic school. He did his A-levels in philosophy and theology. But the part that really struck me was his university experience. He says he deliberately moved in with devout Christian housemates for a whole year.
That is dedication. Most people would not want to live with people they fundamentally disagree with just to test hypothesis.
He wanted to see if he could find the truth in their daily lives. He went to Bible studies. He read Aquinas, Augustine, C.S. Lewis, William Lane Craig. He even mentioned staying up until sunrise discussing theology with friends, just wanting it to click.
He says, and I'm paraphrasing, I have gone above and beyond what can be reasonably expected of any atheist. And the result?
Radio silence. He says, the best account I can give of this experience is that all that truly exists to me is impersonal space and air and rocks.
Wow, that is incredibly bleak. Space and air and rocks. But I see the argument. If theism is true, you have to explain why God is hiding from an altar boy who is literally begging for a sign. You have to invent a reason. Maybe it's a test, maybe it's a mystery.
But if you flip it, if you look at it from naturalism, what do you see?
You see exactly what you'd expect.
Correct. If you talk to an empty room, you expect silence. You don't need some complex theological theory to explain why the empty room isn't talking back. The silence isn't a mystery to be solved, it's just the natural state of things.
So naturalism predicts the silence, theism has to make excuses for it.
Exactly. And that is the power of the argument. It shifts the burden of proof.
He even says something like, I don't choose to disbelieve in God any more than I choose to disbelieve in aliens. It's not a choice. It's a reaction to the lack of evidence.
Which forces the believer into a corner. I mean, is Alex O'Connor lying? Is there really no such thing as a non-resistant non-believer? Because if there is even one person who genuinely seeks and finds nothing, the argument holds.
That is a tough pill to swallow. But let's move to the second pillar. The first one was personal, but this one is global, the geography of salvation.
This is the statistical argument. And again, it's all about predictive power. If there is a universal God, a God of the whole world, you would expect knowledge of him to be distributed somewhat evenly, right? Like the knowledge of the sun or gravity.
Everyone sees the sun. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're in Boston or Bangkok.
Precisely. But O'Connor drops some very stark numbers here. He compares Saudi Arabia and Thailand. Saudi Arabia is roughly 95% Muslim. That is a theistic worldview. Thailand is roughly 95% Buddhist. That is a non-theistic worldview. They don't believe in a creator God in the same sense.
And then he compares that to Massachusetts, where the debate was held, which is roughly 75% theist, mostly Christian.
And he asks a question that is so simple, it's almost funny, but it's devastating. He asks, are the people in Thailand just naturally 20 times more stubborn than the people in Saudi Arabia?
Right. If belief is a choice, or if it's about being open to God's revelation, why does openness track so perfectly with national borders? Is God revealing himself in Riyadh, but hiding in Bangkok?
He calls it the predictability of religious belief. If I know where you were born, I can predict with extremely high accuracy what your view on the supernatural will be.
And under Christian theism specifically, this is a massive problem because, usually belief is tied to salvation. If you don't believe, you aren't saved.
Correct. So if salvation depends on belief and belief depends on geography, then salvation depends on geography. It implies that your eternal destiny is largely determined by the latitude and longitude of your birth. O'Connor asks, can this situation really obtain under the supervision of a God who wants to come to know us and makes his existence equally accessible to all?
It seems so incredibly unfair. It makes God look like he's playing some kind of rigged lottery.
But now, apply the naturalist lens.
Under naturalism, religion isn't a divine revelation descending from the clouds. It's a cultural phenomenon. It's man-made, like language.
Exactly. We expect languages to vary by region. We expect cuisine to vary by region. If religion is a cultural construct, we would expect it to cluster geographically exactly the way it does.
So again, naturalism predicts the map we actually see. Theism has to explain it away.
O'Connor's point is this. Under a loving God, this map is a scandal. Under atheism, it's just sociology.
Just sociology. That really puts it into perspective. Okay, so we have the silence of God and the unfair geography of belief. Now we get to the third pillar. And honestly, this is the one that hit me the hardest. Gratuitous suffering.
And we need to be very specific with our terms here. O'Connor isn't just talking about suffering. He distinguishes between suffering that might have a purpose, what philosophers call soul-making, and suffering that is gratuitous, which means unwarranted, useless, or just meaningless.
Right, because usually when people bring up the problem of evil, they go straight to the big tragedies, the Holocaust, earthquakes. And religious apologists have standard answers for those. Free will, or the fallen world, or God brings greater good from evil.
The grand plan defense. But O'Connor makes a fascinating pivot here. He argues that the biggest problem for theism isn't the grand tragedies, but the menial ones, the annoyances.
I loved his examples here because they are so mundane. Stubbing your toe, tripping over a curb, having a pigeon, poop on your new suit.
It sounds funny, but the logic is deadly serious. If you suffer a great tragedy, you might tell yourself, this is testing my faith, or this will make me stronger. You can invent a meaning for it.
Huh?
But what lesson does stubbing your toe teach you?
Nothing. It just hurts like hell for 5 minutes, makes you angry, and then you forget about it.
It creates no soul. It builds no character. It is forgotten in a day. It is by definition meaningless pain.
Hmm.
And O'Connor asks, why would a sovereign God who designs every single atomic detail of the universe include the sensation of stubbing your toe? It serves no grand design.
It's just a bug in the system. But then he takes it a step further, and this is where it gets really dark. He moves from menial human suffering to animal suffering. And he argues this is the infinitely more difficult problem for a believer.
Yeah, this is often considered the nail in the coffin for many theodicies. Because animals don't have free will. They can't sin, they aren't going to heaven to be compensated for their pain, and they certainly don't develop moral character by suffering.
He paints this incredibly vivid, just heartbreaking picture. He describes a deer in the wild, trapped under a fallen tree.
It's a haunting image. The deer is starving. It's confused. It's in agony. It's dying alone in the forest. No human ever sees it. No lesson is learned by anyone. It's just pure, concentrated misery.
And he asks, what could possibly be the purpose or meaning of this? If there is a supervisor, a God watching over creation, why is that deer suffering for days on end?
And here is the deep dive moment. Compare the two explanations. Under theism, this is a profound mystery. You have to do like mental gymnastics to explain why a loving God allows a deer to suffer alone.
But under naturalism,
Under naturalism, the world is an amoral arena. That's the phrase O'Connor uses. It's a place where organisms just fight to survive.
pain isn't a punishment, it isn't a test, it's just a tool.
Exactly. Pain receptors evolved to help us avoid danger. The deer feels pain because its ancestors who felt pain avoided wolves and fire better than the ones who didn't.
Mm.
The fact that the tree fell on it is just bad luck, gravity and wind.
He says this is exactly what we should expect to see if the natural world is an amoral arena of accidentally existing organisms.
It's the consistency of the naturalist worldview again. It predicts meaningless pain. It predicts unfair distribution of belief. It predicts silence when you talk to the sky.
It really is a case for silence. He's taking the things that believers struggle with, the doubts that keep them up at night, and saying, hey, these aren't problems you need to solve, they're just facts. And they point to a different conclusion.
That is the synthesis of his entire argument. He claims that while theism might be able to construct complicated excuses for these things, God is mysterious, his ways are higher than ours, atheism doesn't need to make excuses. It predicts them. These are features of a naturalistic world, but they are bugs in a theistic one.
It brings us right back to that detective work we talked about at the beginning, parsimony. Which explanation is simpler?
Exactly. You don't have to assume hidden God, plus a reason for his hiddenness, plus a reason for his geographical bias, plus a reason for the deer's pain. You just assume nature, and everything falls into place.
So let's zoom out. What does this all mean for you, the listener? Whether you're a devout believer, a hard-nosed skeptic, or somewhere in the messy middle, this argument forces you to look at your own experience differently.
It raises a critical question for everyone. If you are a believer, O'Connor challenges you with a very hard question. Do you really believe there is no such thing as a non-resistant non-believer? Do you have to assume that everyone like Alex, who says they searched and found nothing, is secretly lying to themselves?
That is a harsh judgment to make about another person's heart, to look at someone who is begging for God and say, you're actually running away.
Precisely. And if you're a skeptic or someone on the fence, it asks you to interpret the silence. Does the silence feel like someone is hiding? Or does it simply feel like emptiness?
O'Connor's point is that if you stop trying to force the God hypothesis onto the world starts to make a lot more sense. The confusion vanishes. The problem of evil disappears and just becomes the reality of nature.
It's a provocative thought. Instead of asking, why is God silent? Maybe the answer is simply, because no one is speaking.
And that is a conclusion that requires no faith, only observation. At least that is the case Alex O'Connor presents. It challenges the believer to explain the bugs in their system, and it offers the skeptic a framework where those bugs are actually features.
It definitely changes how you look at a quiet room, or a map of the world, or even a stubbed toe.
It does. Is the world a broken temple or just a functioning jungle? That's the question we're left with.
Indeed. Keep questioning the silence.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the arguments for silence. It's heavy stuff, but sometimes you have to face the quiet to understand what you really believe.
Absolutely.
We'll see you on the next one. Take care.